Water is the most ordinary substance in your life, and the most dangerous one humanity ever learned to tame. For thousands of years, people trusted what they could see, smell, and taste. Clear water meant safe water. Flowing water meant life. That belief built cities, sustained empires, and quietly killed millions. This film is the story of how we learned that clarity was a lie, how sand, sunlight, fire, chemistry, and finally invisible light itself were used to fight enemies no one could see, and how the simple act of drinking a glass of water became one of civilization's greatest engineering achievements. For most of human history, water was a wager you placed with your own body. You could see the river. You could taste the mineral edge of a spring. You could smell a pond after rain, sweet with plant life or sour with rot. And because the senses were all you had, the senses became the law. Oh, clear meant clean. Cold meant pure. Flowing meant safe. Stagnant meant cursed. The world arranged itself around those judgments. Settlements rose where water looked honest. Empires marched where wells could be trusted. Trade routes bent toward oases and river crossings, and in every case, the first question was not about gold or borders or God. The first question was whether the water would keep you alive. And here is the quiet terror at the root of the story. The most lethal water can look perfect. Before anyone knew what a microbe was, humanity built an entire moral and practical system around appearances. Muddy water was suspect, and often rightly so. It carried silt, and silt carried decay. But clear water was treated like a promise, as if clarity itself were a form of truth. It is difficult now to put yourself back into that older mind. We live in an age where danger is measured. We trust instruments. We talk about parts per million. We buy filters and scan reports and complain when the taste is wrong, as if taste were a luxury rather than a warning. But for thousands of years, taste was the instrument. Smell was the laboratory. And the tragedy is that these instruments were built for survival on the scale of days, not safety on the scale of cities. Imagine the earliest moment that counts as water treatment, not as a product, not as a device, simply as a decision. A person stands at the edge of a river and watches the water swirl brown after a storm. They could drink it, and many did. But they notice that if they wait, if they let the water sit in a vessel, the heavier grit settles. The top looks calmer, clearer. It is a small observation, almost nothing. Yet in that pause, you can see the beginning of an idea that will eventually build modern civilization. Wait. Let gravity do work for you. If you cannot fight the river, borrow the river's own rules. Separation, settling, layers, time. In ancient medical and practical texts from South Asia, the advice appears with a startling directness. Heat the water, expose it to sunlight, dip hot metal into it, filter it through sand and charcoal. The voice is not mystical, it is procedural. It reads, like someone has already learned through pain that some water brings sickness, and that the sickness is not a curse that lifts by prayer alone. Even if they cannot name the enemy, they are learning its power. Boiling is the oldest obvious weapon. Fire changes food. Fire hardens clay. Fire keeps predators away. If you put water into a pot and bring it to a rolling boil, something happens that you can feel with your senses. The smell shifts. The taste becomes flatter, less alive. The water feels safe because it has been transformed. It is not the same river water anymore. It has passed through a ritual of heat. You cannot see the microbes dying, but you can see steam, and steam becomes a sign that the water has been disciplined. Sunlight is subtler. Leave water in the sun and it warms, and warmth suggests purity because warmth suggests drying, and drying suggests the absence of rot. Yet sunlight also does something else, something those ancient observers could not articulate but could sometimes notice. Water left in bright sun can taste different. It can feel less likely to sour. The mechanism is invisible, but the pattern is there. Then there is metal, especially copper. Long before anyone mapped electrons or oxidation, people noticed that water stored in certain vessels stayed fresher. Not forever, not as a miracle, but enough to matter. The difference between water that becomes foul overnight and water that holds its character is the difference between strength and weakness in a household. In the language of survival, small differences are enormous. The true leap, though, is filtration through earth. Sand and gravel are the world's original separators. Rivers sort them. Waves polish them. Layers of soil filter rain as it moves downward, and springs emerge as if the earth itself is a purifier. To watch spring water is to watch the ground performing a kind of slow alchemy. The ancients did not have the term for it, but they had the intuition. If the earth can do it, maybe we can imitate the earth. So you see clay vessels with holes, cloth stretched over openings, porous stones, layered baskets packed with coarse material. You see water poured in at the top, and you see clear water drip out below. This feels like proof. It feels like you have removed the badness. And in a narrow sense you have. Sediment and debris are not harmless. Mud carries organic matter. Organic matter feeds growth. Growth means illness more often than it means health. Removing the visible dirt is not a useless act. It is a partial defense. But it also creates the most dangerous confidence. It makes the water look safe. It is in this emotional logic that the Hippocratic sleeve belongs. The story often turns it into a charming artifact, a quaint precursor to a modern filter. But the sleeve is not quaint if you understand the psychological world it served. In the Greek tradition, water is tied to balance, to bodily humors, to the idea that health is the result of correct mixtures and flows. If water tastes wrong, it must be wrong inside the body. If it smells foul, it must breed foulness in the gut. In that framing, a cloth bag that strains out grit is not a convenience, it is medicine. A person pours water through linen, and the linen holds back the visible particles. The water in the bowl is clearer. It is less offensive. It feels lighter. In that moment, the sleeve is doing two kinds of work. It is doing mechanical work, catching solids, and it is doing symbolic work, giving the drinker confidence that they have acted, that they have applied knowledge, that they are not helpless. Water treatment begins, in other words, as a way to manage fear. The ancient world managed this fear through household practice and social ritual. The wealthy could control more variables. They could collect from preferred sources. They could store water in better containers. They could boil, They could filter. They could send servants to fetch water from a distance. The poor lived closer to the raw edge of nature and the raw edge of other people's waste. If your well is shallow and your neighbor's latrine is closer than it should be, no cloth sleeve can save you. But you do not know that. You only know that sometimes a family falls sick and sometimes they do not. And you build stories to explain the random. By the late 18th century, the ceiling of this world becomes visible. Not because the methods are wrong, but because the scale is changing. Cities swell, streets narrow, waste accumulates. Rivers become conduits not only for water, but for everything a city wants to forget. In smaller settlements, contamination is real, but often localized. In a metropolis, contamination is systemic. The density changes the math. A single source can sicken thousands. The water does not merely support life. It distributes death with efficiency. And still, for a time, the senses continue to rule. A city can look advanced and still drink from a river that smells only slightly worse than it did a decade earlier. People adapt to odors. They normalize the abnormal. They treat slow decline as the new baseline. The shift comes when water becomes not just a health concern, but an industrial input. A practical Scotsman named John Gibb does not enter the story as a humanitarian. He enters as a man who needs water that behaves. In a bleachery, water quality is not theoretical. It affects cloth. It affects color. It affects profit. Iron stains. Silt ruins consistency. If you are selling whiteness, you cannot accept water that carries the river's movement. So in Paisley, in 1804, he builds a filter at a scale that is still modest by later standards, but revolutionary in intent. He does not merely strain water for his household. He creates a system that produces a reliable output. It is the beginning of engineered water, and engineered water becomes the beginning of a new relationship between people and nature. The slow sand filter is an elegant machine because it barely looks like a machine. It is a basin. It is layers of stone, gravel, and sand. It is water allowed to move downward at a deliberate pace. It is gravity conscripted into service. The innovation is not a flashy mechanism. It is the decision to build the earth in miniature. At the bottom, there are channels that collect the filtered water. Above the layers, coarse at first, then finer. The arrangement is logical. The large material supports the smaller. The smaller catches what the larger lets pass. Over time, the top layer becomes something else. It becomes alive. Gibb does not know this. No one around him has the conceptual tools to describe it. But the surface of the sand develops a thin biological skin, a living community that consumes and transforms organic material. Later, engineers will call it by a German name that sounds like an insult and a joke, a dirt cover. But it is one of the most important features of the whole system. The filter does not only trap, it digests. In this, the story offers its first great irony. One of the earliest effective protections against pathogens is a biological process discovered by accident and used without understanding. Humans are still not seeing the invisible. They are benefiting from it without knowing it exists. Gibbs' filter produces surplus, and surplus is the moment where a private solution becomes a public service. He sells the extra water. He puts it on carts. He distributes it. A new idea is born quietly, without a manifesto. People can buy clean water. This is water as a commodity, and it has an unsettling implication. If clean water can be sold, then clean water is not simply a natural right. It is a product of effort and infrastructure, and whoever controls the infrastructure controls the products. In the centuries that follow, this truth will shape politics, class, and public health. But in Paisley, it begins as a practical arrangement. You pay, you receive water that looks and tastes better than what you can gather. In London, the problem is both similar and far more severe. London is not a town experimenting with filtration. London is a machine of empire, a metropolis that consumes resources and produces waste at a scale that overwhelms old systems. The Thames is a symbol of national power and a pipeline for municipal poison. Water companies draw from it. People drink. Illness spreads. And the city continues, because the city can tolerate an extraordinary level of suffering as long as the suffering feels ordinary. James Simpson, working for the Chelsea Waterworks, takes the logic of Gibbs' filter and stretches it across acres. In 1829, he completes a filtration system that is no longer an experiment, but an institution. The filter beds are vast. The water moves slowly, deliberately. Settling ponds give the heaviest filth time to drop out. Then the water passes through sand, and it emerges clearer. For many Londoners, this is a miracle. Water that does not resemble weak tea. Water that does not carry obvious fragments of the river's life and death. But the miracle is also a trap, because it strengthens a belief that will haunt the 19th century. The belief is that foul smells cause disease. Miasma theory is not stupid in the way modern people sometimes imagine. It is a theory built from correlation. Filth smells bad. Places that smell bad are associated with sickness. Therefore, the smell must be the cause. The logic is wrong, but the observation is not. The danger lies in mistaking the signal for the mechanism. Filtration that removes odor and improves taste feels like a cure because it removes what miasma theory labels as the culprit. A city that can drink water that smells less offensive can convince itself that it has solved a medical problem through engineering. And in many ways, it has improved conditions. Yet it has not removed the invisible agents that actually drive epidemic. In 1854, the illusion receives its most famous wound. Cholera strikes Soho, clustering around the Broad Street pump. Hundreds die in a short span. The panic is immediate, but the explanation is contested. Many insist it is the air, the stench, the moral decay of crowded neighborhoods. John Snow approaches differently. He maps cases, he follows patterns. He treats disease as something that moves through specific channels, not as a fog that settles everywhere. The pump handle is removed and the outbreak subsides. The act becomes legendary, a neat moral tale about evidence and courage. Yet the deeper significance is more unsettling. The water, clear or not, is a carrier. The senses cannot be trusted. The most lethal substance in a city can come in a glass that looks pristine. This is the point where water purification stops being an aesthetic project and becomes a philosophical one. It becomes a question of epistemology. How do you know something is safe when safety cannot be perceived directly? The 19th century answers with institute. The Metropolis Water Act and similar regulations emerge from the slow realization that public health cannot depend on individual judgment alone. If water quality determines mortality, then water quality becomes a matter of governance. Filtration becomes mandated. Standards begin to form. Cities adopt the slow sand filter, not simply because it works, but because it fits the moral narrative of the time. It is visible infrastructure. It looks like diligence. Acres of sand beds feel like a civilization taking responsibility. And for a while, the system holds. Disease does not vanish, but patterns begin to change. In some places, slow sand filtration reduces outbreaks. In others, the improvement is uneven, dependent on maintenance and source water conditions and the quality of distribution networks. Pipes leak, sewage infiltrates. A city can build a filter and still poison its residents if the water is recontaminated downstream. Then the germ theory revolution advances, and with it comes a new kind of impatience. If disease is caused by specific organisms, not by air, then perhaps the solution is not only to trap and digest them slowly in sand, but to kill them directly. This is where the story turns toward a chemical that will become both savior and controversy, both the symbol of modern hygiene and the embodiment of modern destruction. Chlorine. To understand the drama of chlorination, you have to understand how it sounds to someone living at the turn of the 20th century. The city has been taught for decades to fear poisons. Industrialization brings new hazards, factory smoke, chemical spills. The modern world feels like a place where invisible dangers multiply. In that context, the proposal to add a chemical to drinking water is not naturally comforting. It sounds like a violation. And yet typhoid fever keeps killing. Cholera still appears. Waterborne death remains a rhythm of urban life. The old systems are not enough. The demand for certainty rises, and certainty is always tempted by radical measures. In Jersey City, the water supply from the Boonton Reservoir becomes the center of a conflict that is both technical and moral. The water company is under pressure. The city wants purity, wholesome water, language that sounds like virtue. Lawsuits loom. Engineers calculate costs. Sewers would take years. Filtration upgrades would take time. Meanwhile, people continue to sicken. Dr. John L. Leal enters as a figure who understands the moment's brutality. He is not selling a gentle improvement. He is proposing a wager of his own. Add calcium hypochlorite, a form of chlorine, in carefully controlled doses, and you can disinfect a city's water supply quickly. The dose must be precise. Too little, and nothing changes. Too much, and the water becomes unpleasant, possibly harmful, certainly politically explosive. This is not a technology you can hide. People will taste it. They will smell it. They will know something has been added. Leal brings in George Warren Fuller, an engineer with the capacity to translate an idea into a working system. Together they build something new, not a landscape of sand beds, but a compact industrial apparatus. Tanks, valves, dosing mechanism. A small architecture of control inserted into a massive flow. The effect is measurable. Typhoid deaths drop. The data speaks in a language that courts can understand. because courts can understand numbers even when they cannot understand microbes. The legal battle becomes a cultural battle. Is purity the absence of visible dirt, or is purity the absence of disease? When chlorination is upheld, it marks a shift that is larger than any single city. It marks the institutional acceptance of a new definition of safety. Safety is no longer what looks good. Safety is what survives measurement. Chlorination spreads because it is cheap, scalable, and compatible with existing systems. You do not need acres of land. You do not need to rebuild the entire city. You can inject protection to the flow. This is why chlorination becomes one of the most significant public health interventions in modern history. It is the moment when the infrastructure of daily life, the ordinary act of turning on a tap, begins to carry a guarantee that earlier centuries could not even imagine. But every guarantee comes with its own. Chlorine works through chemistry that does not discriminate perfectly. It reacts with organic material, and in doing so, it can form byproducts. Over the decades, as science becomes more precise, the conversation shifts. The enemy is not only bacteria. The enemy becomes what happens when you fight bacteria. The 20th century, in this sense, is an era of layered victories, followed by layered complications. Each solution creates a new set of questions. By the mid-century, many cities in the developed world have water that will not routinely kill them with classic waterborne diseases. That is a monumental achievement. So monumental that it becomes easy to forget the baseline that came before. When a society stops expecting typhoid, it begins to argue about taste. It begins to argue about softness. It begins to worry about contaminants that do not announce themselves in immediate death, but in slow risk. Industrial and agricultural modernity adds a new category of threat. Dissolved contaminants, salts, heavy metals, pesticides, chemicals whose danger is not epidemic but chronic, substances that slide past sand and laugh at chlorine. To confront these, purification has to leave the scale of the particle and enter the scale of the molecule. Reverse osmosis has a name that sounds like a trick, and in a way it is. Osmosis is the natural movement of water through a semi-permeable barrier. It is how cells work. It is how life regulates itself. To reverse it is to take a natural process and force it to run backward under pressure. For years, reverse osmosis is a laboratory curiosity, an idea that fails in practice because membranes are not good enough. They tear, they foul, they cannot sustain the pressure required to separate fresh water from salt water at useful volume. In the early 1960s, Sidney Loeb and Srinivasa Sourirajan develop a membrane that changes the equation. Cellulose acetate, engineered in a way that allows water molecules to pass while rejecting salts, becomes the basis for workable reverse osmosis systems. The breakthrough is not only conceptual, it is material. It is the discovery that the right structure at the microscopic level can translate into a new kind of separation. The aesthetic of water purification changes again. The sand beds of the 19th century are earth and brick. The chlorination plants of the early 20th century are concrete and iron. The reverse osmosis era is stainless steel, polymer pressure vessels, a clean industrial minimalism that looks like a hospital for water. If you stand inside a modern facility, you do not see vast, open-air beds. You see rows of cylindrical tubes. You hear pumps. You feel the hum. The system is compact because the work is happening at a scale that does not require land. It requires precision. Reverse osmosis enables desalination at scales that reshape geopolitics. Coastal cities can treat the ocean as a reservoir at a cost in energy and infrastructure. Industries can recover water and remove specific contaminants. Places with brackish groundwater can turn it into supply. Yet the system produces brine, a concentrated waste stream that becomes its own environmental dilemma. Clean water is created alongside a heavier, saltier remainder. Civilization makes a new kind of trash and then has to decide where to put it. Meanwhile, pathogens evolve as a problem in a new way. It is not that bacteria suddenly become immune to chlorine in a simplistic sense. It is that the microbial world includes organisms with protective shells, hardy forms that resist the doses used in conventional disinfection. The most famous wake-up call comes from a parasite whose name becomes shorthand for a modern fear. Cryptosporidium. The outbreaks demonstrate a painful truth. The old magic bullet is not universal. Chlorine, the great protector, has blind spots. Once again, the illusion of total safety cracks, and once again the response is to add another layer. Ultraviolet disinfection is the perfect symbol of modern purification because it is both literal and metaphorical. It uses light to fight invisible enemies, and it represents a society trying to see what it cannot naturally see. UV does not rely on chemistry in the same way. It does not create the same byproducts. It targets genetic material. It prevents organisms from reproducing. It is disinfection by interruption, by scrambling the instructions of life. In a modern treatment train, UV often appears after filtration. Water moves through a chamber where lamps emit a cold blue glow, though the most effective wavelengths are not truly visible in the way people imagine. The glow becomes a visual shorthand for protection, an aura of technological guardianship. The water passes through, unchanged in taste, unchanged in smell, yet radically altered in its biological potential. The multi-barrier approach, which existed in crude form in ancient advice about boiling and sunlight and sand, returns as a formal doctrine. No single barrier is trusted completely. Filtration, disinfection, monitoring, redundancy. The system becomes an argument against complacency. And while municipal systems evolve into these complex networks of barriers, something else happens in parallel. The locus of trust shifts. Purification is household labor. In the 19th and 20th centuries, purification becomes centralized infrastructure. In the 21st century, purification begins to drift back into the home, not as a replacement for municipal treatment, but as a supplement driven by anxiety. Aging pipes, lead contamination, taste and odor complaints, fears about synthetic chemicals that persist in the environment. All of these push people toward point-of-use solutions. Osmosis units, carbon blocks, ion exchange, faucet filters, countertop systems. The old Hippocratic sleeve returns, disguised as modern plastic and branded confidence, sitting under a kitchen cabinet instead of hanging from a peg in a Greek home. This return is not simply technological, it is cultural. It reflects a tension at the heart of modern life. Massive public systems we rarely see, but we also fear them because distance breeds suspicion. When something goes wrong in a distant treatment plant, it feels like betrayal. When a pipe is lead, it feels personal. The response is to take control, to pull purification back into a space you can touch. The irony is that the more advanced the public system becomes, the more it teaches citizens to expect perfection, and the more shocking any imperfection. Now the story widens to the planet scale, because the future of water purification is not only about technology, it is about scarcity. In many parts of the world, the challenge is not whether to add UV after chlorine, or how to manage. The challenge is whether there is any reliable source at all. Droughts intensify, aquifers drop, rivers become contested. The old fantasy that water is an endless gift collapses, and a new concept steps forward, one that would have sounded obscene in earlier centuries, but is now framed as practical survival: potable reuse. The idea is simple, brutal, and inevitable. Wastewater is treated not charged, but to be purified back into drinking water. The line between what is used and what is consumed is erased by technology. The cycle is closed by force. This is not a single machine, it is a sequence of defenses: filtration, often through membranes; advanced oxidation, UV, carbon, monitoring; barriers piled on barriers until the output meets standards that exceed many natural sources. The phrase toilet to tap becomes a cultural weapon, a way to trigger disgust. But the deeper reality is that the water cycle has always been a loop. What changes is the honesty of acknowledging it and the precision of controlling it. In this future, the meaning of purification shifts again. It becomes not only a defense against disease, but a method of creating supply. The purifier This is not a single machine, it is a sequence of defenses: filtration, often through membranes; advanced oxidation, UV, carbon, monitoring; barriers piled on barriers until the output meets standards that exceed many natural sources. The phrase toilet to tap becomes a cultural weapon, a way to trigger disgust. But the deeper reality is that the water cycle has always been a loop. What changes is the honesty of acknowledging it and the precision of control. In this future, the meaning of purification shifts again. It becomes not only a defense against disease, but a method of creating supply. The purifier becomes a generator, not making water merely safer, but making water exist where it otherwise would not. And this brings us back to the beginning, to the quiet human impulse that started the entire. Water treatment is the story of humans refusing to accept the terms of nature. At first, we accept them almost entirely. We live near the river. We drink what it gives. We die when it turns against us. Then we begin to negotiate. We settle water and filter it and boil it and store it in better vessels. We learn to imitate the earth. We learn to harness time. Then we begin to build systems that surpass the earth. We create slow sand filters that digest. We inject chlorine into the flow, poisoning the water in order to save it. We push water through membranes under pressure, separating molecules. We shine invisible light through pipes to scramble the reproductive code of parasites. At every stage, the enemy remains the same in spirit and different in detail. The enemy is what we cannot see. The enemy is what hides behind clarity. The enemy is the false comfort of a clean-looking glass. And the deeper theme beneath the technology is trust. In the age of observation, trust is personal. You trust your senses, your rituals, your household knowledge. In the age of infrastructure, trust is outsourced to engineers and laws and pipes under streets. In the modern age, trust becomes complicated. We trust systems enough to live, but not enough to relax. We install our own filters. We check reports. We share fears. We turn water into a topic of identity and politics. Yet despite all the complications, the arc is unmistakable. Compared to the ancient world, where a clear spring could still be a death sentence, the modern world has achieved something close to a miracle. Not everywhere, not evenly, not permanently. But in many places, the simple act of drinking water has been separated from the constant risk of epidemic death. That separation is not natural. It is constructed. It is built from layers of sand and layers of law, from chemistry and material science, from human attention and human memory. It is maintained by people most citizens will never meet, doing work most citizens will never think about until it fails. And perhaps that is the final irony and the final reason this story matters. Water purification is so successful that it makes itself invisible. It fades into the background of modern life, like gravity, like air, until the day it is threatened. If you want to understand how fragile civilization is, do not look at its monuments. Look at its pipes. Look at the quiet infrastructure that keeps the most basic bargain intact. That bargain is this. You can drink and you can live. And behind that bargain is a lineage that stretches back to a person waiting for silt to settle at the bottom of a clay pot, squinting at the surface and trusting that clarity meant safety, even when it did not. The entire history of purification is the story of learning, slowly, painfully, that clarity is not enough, and then building a world where that lesson is enforced by design rather than by tragedy. Today, clean water feels inevitable. You turn a handle and it arrives, silent, clear, trusted. But that trust is not natural. It is engineered. It is maintained by layers of technology, regulation, and constant vigilance. And as populations grow, climates shift, and water becomes scarcer, that invisible system is under more pressure than ever before. The story of water purification is not finished. It is unfolding right now, beneath our streets and inside our homes. If this documentary changed how you think about something as simple as a glass of water, support the work. Like the video, subscribe for future deep dive documentaries, and share this story with someone who has never questioned what comes out of the tap. Because civilization does not begin with monuments. It begins with water you can trust.